Well, Jim, we wanted some cold weather, and gosh, we've got it.
We certainly have, and I know that the urban people may not think it's very, very nice. But
the skiers are right behind you.
Oh, they are, absolutely, and a lot of them are urban. But look, this is what we really do need to shut those plants down, shut the trees and the shrubs and all those things down, so we get a good cold winter, and we come into a very good even breakout in the springtime. So roll on these cold days.
Now, you talked about the fact that some of the plants were thinking it was spring already. What's that going to do to them?
Well, what happens now, there were some that were actually breaking bud. They will burn those buds off, and there could be a negative effect on production, a few percent, but they'll shut down now and they'll act normally now. They'll go through their normal dormant winter process.
So that hibernation, for the want of a better term, is actually giving them the strength to come through next summer?
It is. They're really drawing on the carbohydrates that are left in the plant itself or the tree itself down into their roots. They want to keep them through reserves, and when they come into the springtime and the soil temperatures start to move up, the root hairs pick up the nutrients, and they start to put the energy back into the tree or the shrub or bush or whatever it may be, vine, in the time that's needed, which is sort of September, October time. So we need this drawing down now with the cold weather to get all those nice nutrients in the right place for them to bring back up to the buds in the springtime.
Now, speaking of that, I'm thinking of Californian thistles, because they do the same thing. That leads me on to herbicides very briefly. Should we be hitting herbicides now? Yeah,
now we've got the cooler temperatures. This is the time. The ground conditions are still good. I mean, we've had a bit of moisture, which we've desperately needed in a lot of parts of New Zealand, but the ground conditions are still good to get machinery on, and there's enough moisture now in the soil particles, which is say down by 25 millimetres or thereabouts, to make those herbicides really maximise the opportunity of killing off whatever we're spraying. So it's a good combination now. We're in the right zone in terms of getting good slow but effective kills into the harder to kill weeds, such as your good old Californian thistle.
And there'll be some tough nuts who'll be itching with their secateurs to get into the pruning.
Absolutely. This is the time of the year where the gangs have all started to be assembled from maybe island people, maybe local people, and they're starting to get those gangs sorted out. They really do look after these people. They house them. They make sure they keep away from alcohol, because sometimes the islanders are a bit affected by that, and they have their churches if they require church on a Sunday, and they really bring them into our community so they can take and this is the objective of taking some monies and funds back to their families, back to the islands. So there's a lot of good situations in that situation. Hawke's Bay, Nelson have got some big gangs, Marlborough with the grapes. If we didn't have these people, we just wouldn't have enough people to get out there and do the pruning that's got to be done. So it's a pretty important role. And of course, there are also the good old hardy New Zealanders who go out there on an annual basis and are experienced pruners. They're invaluable, and they're mainly female. And they'll go out there at 9 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon if they've got children, and work in pretty blooming cold conditions.
Yeah, I wouldn't be out there.
but they train these people, and they work beside them, and that actually is really good. It's good to see, and it's not easy work. It can be quite physical at times.
And there's a whole lot of different systems now. You used to just have the 2 leaders coming out. Now you're looking at 4, and there's all sorts of
there's what we call, whether it be an apple tree or a vine or a kiwi fruit, there's what we call the main cuts. So usually the more experienced pruners will go through and do a main cut first, and then along will come the stronger, generally female males, and they'll pull that surplus wood and timber out of a tree or out of a vine, for instance, and then come along the detailed pruning, which takes a little bit longer. But if you get the main cuts done, you can go back a month later or 2 months later and do the detailed pruning. Now, in apple trees, the detailed pruning requires removing summer shoots that are going to be in the road for next year's production, and also taking off buds that are facing the wrong way. Now, this is where real experience comes into it, and you've got to make sure that you're doing that correctly, so you're addressing the fruit where it's going to be in the tree and where it's going to capture the most sunlight and the most energy to produce nice fruit.
Because sun and air must be important.
Very, very important. One of the things you do with a grapevine or an apple tree or a kiwi fruit, you've got to open the actual plant up to allow that sunlight and air to minimise disease and maximise energy going into the fruits as they grow and develop, and the flowering time and what have you. So it's not just a case of looking at a tree and go, oh yeah, I'll give it a haircut. You've actually got to look at it at a reasonable. A professional, once they get their eye in, they can go into a vine and do 3 vines in 3 or 4 minutes, but they know where they have to make those cuts, and that's quite vital. And it takes a number of years to get that sort of experience. So the farmers and growers, they look after these people because they're invaluable.
And I've seen you with black currants going through the middle of a row.
Yeah, that's right.
Taking the heart of it out.
Yep, that's mechanically pruned, called centre pruning, and that does the same thing as, and says the same effect, sorry, on the bush itself. It's quite dense in there. We need to have air around in there, otherwise we'll get botrytis, and we need to have sunlight getting in there, developing the buds for the following year. So bud development in most fruit trees and bushes and shrubs and raspberries and things like that, black currants, they develop around about November, start their development for the next year's production in November of this year. So,
and when are you harvesting?
Well, you're harvesting in January, but they're already initiating the buds for the following year because of the sunlight through the summer. So they're actually working about 14 months ahead of themselves. So, and the pruning is actually, you're looking at a vine. For instance, a vine's a good example because a pruner may revisit that vine row for 5 years, and he or she will see how that vine's developing. And they're making cuts that are going to actually incur production 18 months later. Not just tomorrow, but up to 18 months later. They're really looking ahead. They're seeing that the head of the vine is starting to raise towards the wire. Now they've got to keep that head down so they can lay the canes down properly. So they might make a hard cut on that head this year, and putting out 2 canes normally, but the following year that head is in its right position for that year, which is actually 18 to 24 months later.
So you're really planning ahead.
Absolutely, and of course when you do take big cuts, you leave quite a wound, and some of them can be as big as your wrist, and some of them can be as big as your thumb, and they need to be protected. And we immediately dab a fungicide compound. It's usually a thick sort of a compound like thick paint, on those wounds, and that absorbs into that wound and actually helps them to seal off and callus, so disease and viruses don't get into those wounds. So there's a lot to pruning, and a lot more than meets the eye.